Okay, the terrifying moment of will the tech work? I think we're okay. So thank you, Marty, for that gracious introduction. Really what I wanted to say is that I'm here learning along with all of you. That's what tonight is about, learning together. I think the title of our evening together, The Echoes of the Holocaust, really speaks to the way that the Holocaust reflects the past, but really propels us, projects us into our future. Antisemitism seems to be indestructibly constructed of the myths and the stereotypes and the disinformation and the imagined conspiracies about Jews because they are Jews. It is really, in some ways, quite that simple. And it manifests itself generation after generation in dehumanization and exploitation and discrimination and violence against Jewish people because they are Jews. It is really, in some ways, that simple. Holocaust author, survivor, witness Elie Wiesel, with whom many of you are familiar, put that singular event of the Holocaust in its historical and modern and anti-Semitic context in 2005 when he spoke at the opening of the new museum at Yad Vashem. And this is what he said. He said, the statement is, it was man's inhumanity to man, and that's something we hear very often, right? This was the epitome of what man's inhumanity to man could be. And Wiesel said, no, it was man's inhumanity to Jews, because Jews were not killed because they were human beings. In the eyes of the killers, they were not human beings. They were Jews, and it is because they were Jews that it was so easy for the killers to kill. So in this, Wiesel is really pointing to that dehumanization that we spoke of just a moment ago. And Marty's right. It can take a charismatic leader or two or three who say, this is okay. It's okay to do this, to legitimize that hate and legitimize the way that hate becomes action. But we should never forget that it is the act of individuals making decisions, making the decision to either reject or to embrace the hateful words and ultimately the hateful actions. Individuals putting all of this into action. And so we need to keep that in mind. Now, Primo Levi, the scientist, Holocaust survivor who spent his early 20s in Auschwitz, had this to say, and you may be able to see it, and you might not, because there's a curtain in the way from my vantage point. But this is what he had to say. He said, we cannot understand the Holocaust. You know, I work with young people, and to ask them to understand something so big is difficult. It's difficult for any of us to really kind of wrap our heads around. But he said, we must understand from where it springs, and we must be on our guard. And if understanding is impossible, knowing is imperative, because what happened could happen again. So that's why we're here together. We're here to know a bit more at the end of the evening, to learn together, and to try to understand from where it springs. The extremism of the Third Reich's ideology and its practice took root in a persistent history of hatred of Jews because they were Jews, dating back at least to the Holy Roman Empire. And I think it's a good way to think about this is think of a sword and think of the edges of the sword. And the first sharp edge is that based on religious foundation. Well, you can kind of address that, right? You can convert. And so you can address that first edge if you are so inclined. But think of the second edge, the other sharp edge. And that's one that we start to see really gain steam in the late 19th century, and that's a racial ideology. Jews are not human because of their very genetic makeup. You cannot avoid that. You are who you are. And so we have this double-edged, and the interesting thing is that that ideology that begins to really pick up steam in the 19th century is still using the tropes, the stereotypes from that first edge of the sword, from when anti-Semitism was based largely on religious foundation. So keep that in mind. We are going to be, I hope there are seatbelts in those chairs, because we are going to be going through the centuries very quickly tonight because of the time that we have. So, and we're going to use images largely, because images can really be a thread that we follow through the centuries. And think about, along that thread is a continuous, just repeated often and often again, discriminatory laws, expulsions, and acts of violence, some of which left hundreds dead, others of which left thousands dead, all along that thread that we're going to follow. So we're going to start, and again, this is going to be fast, so get ready. We're going to start first in the 13th century with a bestiary. Bestiaries were created using illustrations to teach Christian morals and values. The hyena, with red fur and claws, was a character that folks would be familiar with in looking at bestiaries, a stand-in for Satan. He is devouring corpses to signify the devouring of souls. And this particular hyena is a manticore. If you think of the Sphinx, right? This is combining different beings. And the head of this manticore is that of a Jew. And we know this because he's wearing the identifying hat at the time that Jews wore. And he has this sort of the stereotypical sort of elongated nose that we begin to see over and over again. Now, if you look just on the other side of the slide, this is a medieval etching, but it reappears in 1939 on the front page of Der Stürmer, the Nazi weekly newspaper. And this depicts the blood libel accusation, the idea that Jews are compelled by their religion to murder Christian children in order to make matzah at Passover time. This is something that they are compelled to do by their religious teachings. The blood libel reaches back at least to the 12th century, and likely before. All right, here we go. Now we're in the 20th century. And here we are on the left-hand side. That's the cover of a 1911 edition of the 1903 publication in Russia, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And this is a publication that details the Jewish plan for world domination. On that cover, it's important to note we've got symbols of the occult. We've got trope phrases like, "Thus the Jews shall win." And the protocols were written in such a way that they're very vague. They don't talk about dates, times, specifics, right? Very smart. They kind of fit everybody. The Jews are going to accomplish world domination through capitalism. The Jews are going to accomplish world domination through communism, right? It sort of fit everybody's need for the plan that folks knew the Jews had in place. Just next to it, 1920 to 1922, Henry Ford, our esteemed industrialist, Henry Ford, reprints, serializes the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in his newspaper, the Dearborn Independent. He's familiar with it because he believes in what it has to say. His newspaper is failing, and he knows that this is a way to get people to buy newspapers. They're all going to want to read this. So he reprints it. Let's move a little further along, and there's the 1937 poster advertising an exhibit at the museum in Munich, and what it reads is, "The Eternal Jew," right? So what we see, the eternal Jew, money in hand, whip in the other hand, symbolizing power, and communism in his pocket. It's everything the Protocols of the Elders of Zion said was part of the plan. I think most of us are familiar, have seen something like the photo on the left-hand side. That is a rally in the Berlin Sports Palace in June of 1943. We've seen pictures like this before. Every seat is taken. The sign reads, Führer command and we follow. We've seen these in books. Students have seen these in books. We've seen them in newsreels. So we're not surprised to see another rally. We're familiar with these photos. This rally, attended by 20,000 people, a pro-Nazi rally. Madison Square Garden in New York City, 1939, billed as a pro-America rally. The signage there says, "Stop Jewish domination of Christian Americans." So when we think that it's there, and then it was here, and then. This was the time of Father Coughlin. This was the time of the quasi-military Christian Front. And this was the time of accusations that President Roosevelt had enacted the Jew deal, which was a communist plan. This was the time when Charles Lindbergh, an American hero, wrote in 1939 of, quote, "the pressing sea of yellow, black, and brown that threatened the white race." He thought a war with Germany and other Western countries was, quote, "racial suicide," and would lead to the dilution of European blood by foreign races, right? The Jew is working to replace us. And lest we think that children were immune to this, on the left-hand side, this is the game of the Jew, which first appears in the 15th century. Notice the Jew is in the center square. You move your tokens around, you hope you roll a 7, and can put them in the middle because no one can take those away from you. The Jew likes money, the Jew hoards money, so you're lucky if you land on the Jew. This game board from 1800 in Great Britain. To the right, a children's book in Germany, 1938. It is called The Poisonous Mushroom. And it states, just as it is often hard to tell a toadstool from an edible mushroom, so too is it often hard to recognize the Jew as a swindler and criminal. And the book says, the God of the Jews is money. So now think about the bestiary picture that pulls together two types of beings. Think about this amalgam on the cover of this children's book. Think about the trope that the Jews collect money, that they bring money, that they are controlling. They control this space on the board. They control governments. They control finances. So keep that in mind. So across the centuries. So, you can imagine how excited those children are who are on the left side of the screen, right? Adolf Hitler has just become chancellor, and now he's visiting their Hitler Youth gathering, right? This is an exciting moment for them. I think we can all understand why children would be excited about that. So lots of smiles. Everybody's happy. This is not the place to go through the history of the Hitler Youth movement, but even before it became compulsory, it grew exponentially in the years that were to follow. So we're not surprised to see a very large gathering of children in the other photo. What we might be surprised is to find out that this was Camp Siegfried in Yaphank, New York, on Long Island in the 1930s. Children were sent there to swim and to hike, to practice archery, to go to dances, and to be steeped in Nazi ideology. Not only did it serve youth, but Camp Siegfried held all kinds of celebrations on the weekends. The Long Island Railroad had the Siegfried Special on weekend mornings to bring people out to Camp Siegfried. New York Times reported in 1938 that for German Day festivities, 40,000 people attended this camp. And when they got there, they received a warm welcome. That's what it says right above the camp. They were greeted with Nazi and Hitler Youth flags. They were greeted by men in Italian black shirts, SA-style brown shirts, and Nazi military uniforms. They were told the purpose of the camp was to raise the future leaders of America and make sure they were steeped in Nazi ideals. There was no question what this camp was about. These are individuals making the decision that this is the place they want to be, that this supports what they are thinking. And they are not unsettled by what this camp has to present. Just after the Nuremberg laws were enacted, it wouldn't be a surprise to come upon a town and see a sign that says, Jews not welcome here. It wouldn't be surprising to find street signs that celebrated Adolf Hitler and Goering and Goebbels. We might be surprised to know that the town that surrounded Camp Siegfried, those were the street signs. That's a photo from that community. Those street signs, of course, disappeared after the start of the war. The camp was closed after the start of the war. What you might be surprised to learn is that not only were there street signs like this, but there was a covenant on the books that only folks who of German ancestry could purchase housing in this area. That covenant was on the books until 2017. People making real choices, people making real decisions that have real consequences for real, maybe people, right? We can't identify the moment in a person's brain when suddenly the Jew is less than human, the Jew is easy to target, the Jew becomes easy to kill. We can't identify that, but we know that it's built on moment after moment, century after century, deed after deed. It doesn't just spring up. Columnist Bret Stephens just wrote in the New York Times, he described it as the long struggle against those who mean harm and also against those who excuse their actions and those whose apathy speeds their way. And if we talk about then and there, and we talk about here and then, we have to talk about here and now. So a recent study by the ADL, they asked, they shared with over 4,000 people a list of sort of typical anti-Semitic tropes and said, which of these do you believe in? And they recorded how many believed 6 or more. In 2022, it was 20%. In 2024, this would be January of 2024, it was 24%. What were some of those tropes? And I won't read all of them to you, but what were some of them? Jews have too much power in the international financial markets. Jews have too much control over global affairs. Jews have too much control over the United States government. Jews have too much control over the global media. People hate Jews because of the way Jews behave. They hate Jews because they are Jews. 24%. Think of that eternal Jew. Does it fit those tropes? It sure does. He's got the coin in one hand, the whip of power in the other, and governments in his pocket. We can reach back to our very recent past and see the building blocks to this contemporary moment. So 2017 Charlottesville, this young man has made his vocation to protect everyone. He stands in front of the marchers of Charlottesville. They have a sign that reads, Jews are Satan's children, right? They march saying, Jews will not replace us, right? The great replacement theory. It's what Charles Lindbergh was talking about. If you let them do it, they'll replace us. Jews are Satan's children, the bestiary, the hyena with the red fur, and the Jewish face with the Jewish hat. We know that on October 2018, a gunman enters the Tree of Life synagogue and murders 11 because they are Jewish. In the same way that in 2015, a gunman entered Mother Emanuel in Charleston, South Carolina, and killed folks there just because they were African American. At an anti-vax rally in Columbus, Ohio, if you were there, you would have heard that Jews controlled the Chinese labs and had created COVID, and you would have seen someone with this sign the real plague. A rat, a Jew, the real plague. We've seen that before. It's like that mushroom, that poisonous mushroom, that you've got to look hard because it's easy to miss. Robert Keith Packer at the DC insurrection in January wore this sweatshirt, Camp Auschwitz. I'd like to tell you that you can't get it, but it's pretty easy to get still. In that same year, the FBI shared that Jews were the victims of more than 50% of all religiously motivated hate crimes, even though they were only 1/50th of the overall population. And then, of course, in May 14, 2022, the mass shooting in a Buffalo, New York grocery store, the 10 people killed and those wounded, all African American. The murderer, we later found out, was a proponent of the Great Replacement theory, right? The Jews support civil rights because they are seeking to replace the white people of this country and of the world. And the ongoing sustained support of anti-Semitism is global, and we know that. So if you were to get online, you would see University of Auschwitz T-shirts being worn at German rallies. Established 1941 with the outline of the towers that we have become familiar with. You would see in Italy sweatshirts, Auschwitzland, in Disneyfied script, right? And on our you would hear chants of "Gas the Jews," and on our own streets, "Go back to Poland." The irony in that statement is that if we went back to Poland, of course, we'd see a greatly reduced Jewish population. There were 3.5 million Jews before the war. There are maybe 20,000 now in Poland. We would find more little statuettes of the lucky Jew in Poland than actual Jews. The lucky Jew is sold widely, and it is intended for what you might imagine, right? They say a Jew in the home is worth coin in the pocket. And what do we see? We see the misshapenness of the Jew as a sign of that degeneration. We see Jewish influence over money and the market. We see supernatural powers. It's not a big step from this that you are so happy to have in your home because it might bring you some luck, to turning all of those things into suspicion and resentment and hatred. When Elie Wiesel concluded his remarks at that Yad Vashem opening, he said this. He said, "My good friends, we never try to tell the tale to make people weep. It's too easy. We didn't want pity. If we decided to tell the tale, it's because we wanted the world to be a better world, just a better world, and learn and remember. There is a frightening character in all of Kafka's stories. It's always the messenger who tried to deliver the message and is unable to do so. We feel sorry for a poor messenger, but there is something more tragic than that. When the messenger has delivered the message and nothing has changed." Wiesel said, "You heard tonight about anti-Semitism and intolerance. The messenger has delivered the message. What is our role? We must become the messenger's messenger." Rabbi Tarfon said, "It's not yours to finish the task, but neither are you free to set it aside. So I would say that we need to engage young people, we need to engage our neighbors and our friends and our colleagues, and even the people with whom we have great difference in other areas, and we need to widen our lens and deepen our considerations and ask the very good questions, the ones that don't have simple answers. But we need to ask, probably most importantly, as Holocaust scholar said, Yehuda Bauer said, we need to determine the what now and the what next. And that's what we're here to do tonight, to begin to determine the what now and the what next. I am blessed to be with all of you tonight, and you have my deepest gratitude for your being here. So thanks so much. Appreciate it.
I'm going to ask the panel members to come up and take a seat.